I'm Maryn.
And I'm Christie.
And you're listening to Hung, a podcast where we talk about true crime from the court of law to the court of public opinion.
All right, well, today is a different case, so why don't you tell everybody who we're talking about today?
Okay, today we are talking about Tracey Nix. Don't remember how old she is or any other details about her, except that she lives in Florida. So we're taking you right back to the Sunshine State.
We can't get out of Florida for some reason.
I think it's that Sunshine Law. I think it's the ease of access to all of the information, right?
Could be, but I don't know.
Or it's just the people.
Okay, so what is she on trial for?
I don't have it in front of me. Go for it.
So she was charged with aggravated manslaughter in the death of her 7-month-old granddaughter, Uriel Shock, in 2022. This one seems pretty straightforward to me.
There's not a lot of question about did it happen, did it not in this way, right? Like some are, what are the theories? How did it come about? Was it actually you who did it, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it's one that I questioned, is it interesting enough because it is so straightforward, you know?
Right.
And so I'm thinking there has to be stuff outside of what was presented in the courtroom because it really seems like it's a case of how you interpret the law and whether that applies in this case or not. Okay, so opening statements, the facts are pretty simple. Tracey had gone to a church group in the morning of the incident, and the state notes that it was a prayer meeting, and sometime that morning during the prayer meeting, one of Tracey's daughters reaches out to her and says, hey, I have a hair appointment this morning. Can you watch Uri for me while I'm at the hair appointment? And she says, sure. She arranged to go to lunch with 3 of the women from her prayer group. They pick up Uri from her daughter's place of business, go to Beef O'Brady's, and, you know, Uri's the center of attention there. They leave around 1:40. Tracey puts Uri in the car and drives about 10 minutes back to her house, and she gets out of the car and starts talking to her dog, goes inside, forgets that Uri is in the car, and she's doing other things for hours in the house. She had plans to take one of her other grandsons out to dinner and shopping for presents, and she was kind of had that on her mind and was worried about the timing about that, and they were an hour late, and she gets back in her car. This is around 4:30 in the afternoon, and she drives back to the barn at the back of their property, is sitting in the car talking to her husband who's sitting on the riding lawnmower. And meanwhile, Uri is in the back seat already dead, and she even talks to her other daughter about bringing over Aiden and have you fed the pigs yet? And when are you guys getting here? And she still hasn't remembered that she had Uri. And like around 5 o'clock, she remembers, oh my gosh, I had Uri. They pull the car seat out of the car, put her on the ground, and Grandpa starts trying to perform CPR.
Yeah, I mean, trying to do CPR on a 7-month-old is...
Yeah. It's terrible. I mean, and the other daughter drives up right around the time that they're pulling Uri out of the car and they're starting CPR. She can see them over there around something when she's coming over, but she doesn't know what's happening. And her son is about 12. She calls 911 to say we need an ambulance. And she is just, I don't know, she's beside herself. You know, like, I've got to get out of here. I can't be here. I don't want my son seeing this. And she doesn't really have any information. How long has it been? Is she breathing? Is, you know, like things like that. She's like, I have no idea. I just pulled up. I don't know what's going on. I can't go over there. I have my son with me. You know, it's just a hard situation. And as she hears the ambulance pulling up, she leaves with her son. And so all of that, everyone agrees that's exactly
right. That's what happened.
What happened, you know. But the difference, the state starts out with basically we all make mistakes, and typically we say sorry and we move on, but sometimes sorry is not enough, and some actions have consequences, and that's just the way that it is. And the defense is basically saying you have to focus on the actions of the defendant, not the outcome necessarily, and that this was a family tragedy and it doesn't amount to a crime. You know, describing Tracey like she's a retired school teacher. She taught for 39 years. She was a principal for 17 years. She, you know, church, choir. So I thought it was interesting that the defense made a point of saying that she was not going to a prayer meeting, as they said, but Bible study. Why do I emphasize that? Because that's where she was heading that morning. I'm like, okay. I mean, what?
Don't you see that makes her a better Christian?
Right. I'm not just praying. I'm studying the Bible
too. So.
Yeah. So I thought that was weird that he would emphasize that. I don't know. I mean, it almost makes it seem like he's trying to show where the state's wrong in the one thing that he can pick out that they're wrong about or something.
I think with a case as straightforward as this, probably for the defense, it's kind of like, what is your job here? I mean, to basically try to get the least severe punishment possible.
Right. Clearly, the state doesn't understand everything because they got this wrong. You know, it wasn't prayer group. It was Bible study.
Right. Also just even shows how she's a good person. She deserves a pass.
Right. The only addition that they make to the story is that when Tracey pulled up to the house, there was a distraction. They had roofers working, replacing the roof, so she couldn't park in the garage. It's that outside of your routine, where am I going to park? And then, I don't know, something with the dog that she was distracted by too. And that the combination of those things, she just forgot. It was not in the plan for her to have Uri that day. It was a last minute change, the distraction of the roofers and the dog, and she just simply forgot and went into the house and went about her day. And so for him, he says there are no aggravating factors. It just was forgetting something. And we all do that. And also says, like, the state is going to show some videos, and if they didn't show those videos, we would show those videos. So kind of we want them seen. These videos are not going to damage our client. In fact, we feel like these videos actually exonerate our client.
This isn't a gotcha. We would have showed you anyway.
Right. You know? Yeah. And basically, like, when you watch the videos, you're going to see how much Tracey loved her granddaughter, that she would never intentionally do something to harm her granddaughter. As far as the testimony goes, her daughter, Uri's mother, Uriel Shock, she's the first witness, and the state asks her about her family, goes through them all, and then asks, okay, who is Tracey Nix? And she says, that is my mother, and kind of does a sigh type of thing, which I thought was interesting. I mean, obviously, this is a terrible situation, but she talks about kind of that day and how things went, and she had just gotten a text reminder that morning from the salon and had forgotten to put the appointment on her calendar, so she hadn't remembered that she had that appointment until last minute. And she said usually she just brings her kids with her whenever she has appointments, and this was the first time that she'd actually had her parents watch Uri for like this type of personal appointment. But then when the defense gets up to cross-examine her, he's trying to do a bit of a like jokey tone with her, which I don't know, that doesn't seem really appropriate for a woman who has lost their child.
Right.
But kind of like, yeah, I mean, you probably forget things all the time, you know, your doctor's appointments, and that probably happens all the time, that something last minute comes up and you forgot that you had that appointment. And she's like, no, actually, my kids usually go with me. And I guess this is the time she says this was the first time that she had actually done that. And I felt like there was some tension between her and the defense attorney.
Okay.
I mean, mild, but I think there's kind of like, don't act like this is just a, oh, yeah, so, you know, I mean, just very flippant in a way that almost collegial isn't necessarily the right word, but like, oh, we're all on the same team here and we're close. And like, don't be coming at me like this shouldn't be a big deal. I don't know.
And if there's any sort of hint of like maybe putting some blame towards her either, of like, it was last minute. How would you expect your mom to be on top of it?
She wasn't planning on this, you know. This was kind of a, like, that happens all the time. Like, no. And she
Not to me.
Yeah, she was very much, I have all of these things scheduled and I have all of these things with my kids and I have this routine. So I think the idea of presenting her in some way that she is not organized and on top of things was off-putting.
Yeah, I totally get that. I mean, I am a very big calendar schedule person, and so if something's not on my calendar, it's pretty rare that happens, and it can throw things off because it's like, oh my gosh, whoa, I wasn't planning for that, and I might have double planned things because I totally forgot about that or whatever. That's not very common for me, so I totally would understand that happening, of like how that might be like, whoa, okay, I got to figure this out. A hair appointment is not like that short notice. You can't really cancel without having to pay a cancellation fee and all this stuff. And who knows when she could get back in and blah, blah, blah.
Right, exactly. And to be like, I typically am a person who's very on top of my calendar, and then there was this one time that I forgot to put it on my calendar when I scheduled it at my last hair appointment. Now it's been a month and a half and I forgot about it, you know, and like that's abnormal, and to treat it like it's the norm would be irritating if it's not, you know.
Sure. And also, like, I'm sure she's already thought of these things. Man, well, if she says she normally takes her kids with her, man, if I had just taken her with me.
Absolutely.
Or if I had been on top of it and I had arrangements made, whatever.
Yeah, I mean, it's just all the shoulda, coulda, woulda, you know, like if only I had done this, the outcome would have been different. And I mean, that's horrible, right? To like, you just want to
that's horrible.
Do-over.
Yeah, it's horrible in this minor inconveniences of our day-to-day lives. You can only imagine with something as life-altering and awful as that.
Yeah. Definitely. Then the next witnesses are the three friends who were at lunch with Uri and Tracey. They all tell the same story. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. But also, okay, so back to when the defense attorney says, it was not a prayer group, it was Bible study. And then the first witness gets up there and she says, yeah, we were at Bible study. Actually, at prayer group. And so then all of them say it was prayer group. So the whole thing that the defense attorney makes this big deal about how it wasn't a prayer group.
Where did you hear it was Bible study from? Everybody else says it's prayer group.
Yeah.
You're trusting the one who forgot her kid in the car, like the grandkid.
Yeah, so that was weird to me. It doesn't even really matter, and then it turns out that you were wrong.
Right, so it's even more like,
it's
what?
Just dumb. Yeah, it's just dumb. They all talk about how attentive she was. We can see that on the video too. You know,
these are not really a question. These are witnesses that were called up by the state or by the defense?
By the state.
Okay.
Yeah. So they all identified the video as being video of them at Beef O'Brady's and verify like the time and what happened that morning, but they're all telling the same story. And the fact that we've got the videos, you probably don't even really need all of those witnesses except for just introducing the video into evidence. But I think what the state is trying to point out is that they show the video of all of these women and Uri in the restaurant. And they're there for over an hour, and there's all this attention on Uri. Everyone's oohing and awing over her, and she's getting all these things out. Right. I mean, she's cute and fun, and everyone's just obsessed with her. It was kind of weird, though, that they were saying that Tracey had looked through the diaper bag trying to find if there was food or something in there, and then she ended up feeding her from a straw. But then later when the CSI techs present evidence, they enter the diaper bag into evidence, and there are 2 bottles in there, one of which actually still had formula in it. So it's kind of weird that she goes through the diaper bag and then she ends up feeding her water through a straw instead of giving her the bottle that has formula. in it. So I don't quite understand that. Not like that really matters, but it just is kind of weird.
Proves she had malicious intent.
Yeah, like just proves that maybe her vision isn't that good either, along with a poor memory. I don't know. And then the drive to her house is less than 10 minutes.
Oh, yeah.
And she went straight home. And in what world, when you've just had all of this interaction with her, would you just forget about her? If she had just gone and picked her up from her daughter's house and driven home and then, oh, shoot, I forgot because I just haven't had much interaction or anything with her and I just got distracted. But it's like, just spent over an hour with her, fawning over her, and then you drove home and you forgot she was there. That's weird.
Right.
And the idea of you have been given the responsibility for an infant, you have to be aware of that responsibility. And it's not the same as forgetting about groceries.
I mean, not only, like you said, is there a lot of attention on the baby there, so it shouldn't have been something that slipped her mind that quickly. Right. But there's also a way bigger deal if you leave a baby in the car versus leaving your groceries in the car. Yes. I mean, worst thing that happens, man, I think they're all spoiled. And my ice cream's melted. I guess I'm going to have to go back to the store and I wasted some money. That sucks. But there's more, like you said, more responsibility to be on top of it when it's a human life involved, especially a child that couldn't have gone out if they wanted to,
Right. Yeah, exactly. So that's what the state is emphasizing, is that the grandmother that was at Beef O'Brady's was not the grandmother that stepped out of the car.
Okay.
And that grandmother should have been the one that stepped out of the car, the one who had all her attention on this grandchild of hers, and that she allowed other distractions and thoughts of other things to keep her from remembering about this defenseless baby that she was responsible for. Yeah. They were all teachers, along with Tracey, and they all went to the same church, mostly spent time together through church and choir and things like that.
And prayer group / Bible study.
Yeah. So they met for prayer group every Tuesday morning, and that's where she was when her daughter reached out to her to ask about taking Uri.
Okay.
And then her other daughter, Rebecca, she takes the stand and just talks about her plan to take her son Aiden over to her mom's house and that he was going to stay with grandma. They were going to do the shopping thing and whatever.
It's a very typical grandma thing.
Yeah. And apparently they had some 4-H pigs that Rebecca's son Aiden was taking care of, and I don't know, what do they show him at the fair or something? I don't know, like I'm not sure what so he was going to come over and feed the pigs first, and then they were going to go, and she just talks about coming up and what she saw, and they play the 911 recording of her. So her testimony is pretty short and to the point. When the defense cross-examines, they ask her about where her mother was and if she had seen her around the side of the barn. And she says, yeah, she'd gone looking for her, saw her around the side of the barn, and she was bent over, hyperventilating, was gagging or had vomited, and was clearly upset and obviously was a traumatic experience.
Yeah.
So that's the end of that. And then we have the first responders that come out, and the crime scene techs and the detectives on scene. And basically from the EMS, they came out and, immediately they're starting to do life-saving measures. When one of the EMTs goes to intubate her, her jaw is locked up already. Then they kind of turn her on her side, and they notice that her hand is clenched tight, and they see the signs of lividity on her back. And so they realize she's been dead for some time, and she's not coming back. So they go ahead and take her to the hospital, because anytime that there's a pediatric death, even though they stop the life-saving measures, they take them away from the scene. So that's what they did. And the processing of the scene was pretty much, they took pictures of the car, where the car was, how far it was to the barn, and, really just kind of where things were situated. But it's all pretty straightforward. They do show body cam footage of the primary detective that takes over the case, and she's the one that's talking to Tracey on the scene. And Tracey is just so distraught, She just, I can't do this, I can't be here when she gets here. Normally in this situation, Yuri's mom or dad, so Kayla or Jonathan, would come and pick her up after they left the office, which was usually between 4:30 and 5. And when the 911 call was placed, it was pretty much right at 5 o'clock. So I think Tracey's recognizing they could pull up any minute, and I can't be here when they get here. I can't face them.
I guess I'm a little confused. They normally pick her up at 4:30 or 5, but it's not common that, does she watch her often, or?
Yeah, so they said she'll watch her 1 to 2 times a week, typically, usually just in the afternoon. Like, mom will take her to the office in the mornings, and then she didn't really say why she would leave her in the afternoon. Like, the grandpa would typically pick Yuri up on those days when they were going to watch her for a bit, and he would bring her home and bring her into the house, and then Tracey would watch her during the time that she was there, and then they would pick her up after close of business, 4:30, 5 o'clock, and take her home.
Must just, for whatever reason, work that way with her schedule at work.
I think it was more the change in routine for the morning, that normally she had her with her at the office in the morning, and any appointments and stuff that she had, she was taking her kids with her. So I don't know if the tending in the afternoon was more about grandma spending time with her, or I'm not really sure.
Okay. And so she's either thinking, well, this is around the time she's coming home anyway, so I don't want to be here when she gets here and sees all of this.
Yeah.
Or wondering, if somebody's going to notify her at some point, so I don't know if she's going to come in already knowing what's happening. Either way,
it seemed like there was a lot of stress on, I can't be here when she finds out. I can't be here when she gets here. I can't face her. She wanted to just get in her car and leave. And of course, she's very upset. And the detective is like, we can't let you get in your... First of all, that's the, quote, scene of the crime. So she can't get in her car. And also, she's not in a state to drive. And so, well, I need to take a statement. Well, if you need to take a statement, you got to do it right now, because I gotta go. She's wanting to get in her car. She's wanting to just drive and go somewhere. They convince her to get in the car with them and go down to the sheriff's department so that they can take her statement there, which is what they do. They read her rights. When she gets there, they tell her she's not under arrest. But because they're having this conversation in the sheriff's office or department, that they want to make sure that she understands her rights. And they ask her about the timeline of events and what happened. And, she is blaming herself for sure. When the detective says, you're not under arrest, and she says, I wish that I were, kind of thing. You should put me in jail. Why do I always hurt the people that I love? Who does that? Who forgets about a baby that they're taking care of? So, I don't know. The detective's asking her, well, so what were you doing during the day? And she's just like, I was talking to my dog, and I practiced the piano for an hour, and I'm doing all of these things. And I'm sure she's just like, this is so ridiculous, how could I be doing that and just never think of her again for close to 3 hours? And the fact that she got in the car at 4:30 and didn't even remember then, when she's in the car with her and drives, and she's sitting in the car and she's talking to her husband out the window, still doesn't remember. It's just an odd, sad situation.
That's so sad.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I also watched the body cam in that interview, and you don't get much out of it besides her saying over and over again, I can't do this. Pretty much that's the thing that she says the most, I can't.
Well, and I think about it. There are situations that you're like, I can't accept this reality, and there's nothing you can do about it. You can't change it.
The first stage of grief is denial, right? And I'm sure you would feel that way if it was your own kid, but knowing that you were watching the child of somebody else, right? We were watching my grandma's dog recently, and she almost got hit by a car, and that was definitely a thought of oh my gosh, I'm gonna have to text my grandma and say your dog's dead. Which of course I would never want to compare a human being or somebody's child to to someone's
being
pet.
equivalent.
Right.
Yeah, it's not equivalent.
Definitely not. But even that, like,
yeah,
I can only imagine it would be tenfold that feeling. Right.
Yeah. You know, what I'm getting from what you're saying is basically like knowing how horrible that situation felt, to think of having to call your grandmother and tell her that her dog died while she was gone and you were in charge of her.
Right.
Comparatively, how much worse would it have to be? And that's the closest that you can come to relating to the experience on a personal level.
Yeah, 100%. And knowing that you may have to kind of relive that by having to tell them, and knowing that, like, no matter how sad that would be for you, it's going to be worse for them, you know? Like,
yeah, absolutely. I got the feeling that she was suicidal. You know, that the detective was saying, like, well, kind of I can't be here, I can't do this, and, well, where would you go? Well, you know what I would do, kind of thing. Or I would just get in my car and drive as far as I could. And
until it stopped. And then what, right? Like,
right.
Well,
yeah, I think it really was like, I cannot face this situation. This is so horrible. I can't do it. You know, like, I don't want to do it, and I need a way out. And I think I would feel the same.
Oh, yeah, 100%.
I just would not want to face that reality and have to face my daughter, whose child you allowed to die under your care. So there were very few objections during this trial. A lot of times the defense didn't even question at all. And if they did, it was pretty short, and the state didn't ask any follow-up questions afterwards. One objection that the defense made, I think it was the only objection that I can recall, there were pictures being entered into evidence of Uri at the hospital, and the detective who had gone and taken those pictures, he had taken a picture of this teddy bear that had been placed with her before he zipped up the body bag, and the defense objected to that for relevance. I feel like maybe he's thinking this is going to be too emotional, like bring up emotion for the jury, and that he didn't want that.
Yeah, sure. Or, like, I mean, it's already awful enough, right? And you're just like, the more sad that the jury feels about it, probably the less likely it will go in the defense's favor.
Yeah.
Right? So,
I mean, it isn't relevant. You know,
no,
it isn't relevant at all. So I think that was a fair call, but I can see probably he didn't want that image with the jury.
And which, again, I think the lack of objection goes to show that this is kind of a unique case because there's no question about what happened.
Right.
There's no like, no, we don't think it happened that way. And our experts say something different than what your experts say, like, it happened. It's more so a question of what kind of punishment is deserved.
Yeah, for sure. And the lead detective basically wanted to bring out that Tracey was cooperative with the investigation, that she was always forthright and honest in all of her answers. She wasn't trying to hide anything. I mean, he kind of asked, did you ask for their permission to search their vehicle and to search their phones? And she says, no, we got a search warrant. That's kind of standard procedure in this type of case, just to cover all of our bases. But I think, well, she probably would have said yes, absolutely, you know, which she probably would have. You know, I don't think she was trying to hide anything at all.
Right. There was no, come back with a warrant if you want to look through my car.
Right. Yeah. I think the one real point of contention with the witnesses was with the medical examiner. And when the defense attorney was questioning the lead detective, he said, so you told them something about the death being quick? And she says, correct. And then the medical examiner gets up there and, you know, she talks about...
Who was the first person, sorry, that was asked the question about if the death was quick?
So the detective, Samandal, now Fletcher, she was the lead detective on the case. And when she was being questioned about the investigation, I guess she may have stated to Uri's mother the idea that the death was quick.
Okay.
But then when the medical examiner gets up, she's just describing what happened and says she was a normal, healthy, well-nourished child. There's no reason that she would have died other than the fact that she was left in the car for an extended period of time, and kind of talked about the sequence of events that would happen while she was in the car, you know, as the temperature goes up. And she talks about after 10 minutes, the temperature in the car will rise 19 degrees more than the outside temperature.
Wow.
And they said that the outside temperature that day was in the 90s, so low 90. And so within 10 minutes, the temperature in the car would have been 110 degrees, say.
Yeah.
And then after 40 minutes, the temperature rises by 40 degrees more.
Oof.
So, and she was in the car for 3 hours. So she talks about, well, the first thing that's going to happen is the blood vessels are going to dilate. You're going to sweat trying to cool the body, but eventually that's going to affect the blood pressure, and the brain will stop getting enough blood flow and enough oxygen. It will start to swell, which will cause loss of consciousness and potentially seizure activity. The organs will start failing because they're not getting enough oxygen, and then eventually the child would die. And the defense cross-examination was kind of like, the defense actually said instant death. Something like asked her about instant death. She's like, no, it was not instant death.
Right. Well, it's also like instant from what moment? Like instant from when she left her in the car? Because obviously, no. That wouldn't make any sense. And also the process, right, as you're describing too, the process itself is a process, right?
I don't think anyone would think that you could ever describe what happened as instant death. And then he says, do you remember talking to the lead detective? She says, I don't actually recall that conversation. Do you remember telling her that it was a quick death? And she says, no, I don't remember that. And basically saying that quick is a manner of speech as compared to days, longer stretches of time. And she pointed out the onesie that Uri was wearing was soaked with sweat. So she had to be alive long enough to produce that much sweat before she would have died. And that's not something that happens quickly.
Right.
And also stomach contents. She had some formula in her stomach, which formula typically takes about 3 hours to pass through the stomach. So there's kind of that time frame. And, she's like, well, 30 minutes, that's quick in her estimation.
Sure.
It's not instant death, though.
Well, in talking about the detective talking to the mom, it also seems like quick is a kind way of talking to them, like whether it's true or not, of like... What is she trying to say?
She didn't suffer. Like, she did suffer.
Right. You die from being in a hot car. There's suffering involved in that. It's not like, oh, she fell and broke her neck. She didn't suffer. It was
instant
just
death.
Out, right. I'm like, no, it wasn't. It couldn't have been. But I can understand wanting to console the mother in that way.
Right. It was quick. She wasn't suffering for 3 hours, right?
Yeah, I don't know.
Which is true. She wasn't suffering for 3 hours because she was already going into rigor when EMS arrived. So she had been dead for...
suffering for the whole time that she was left in the car. That's true.
Yeah. I mean, it was interesting that the crime scene investigator talked about how they had received the onesie into evidence the following day from the hospital. And when they got that onesie, it was still wet.
Oh.
So it was soaking wet. And she had to put it in their whatever special place to dry it out before they then put it in an evidence bag and took it into evidence. So it's been more than 12, 16 hours and it's still wet because it was that soaked. Yeah, it was not quick. That was not instant. And then after that, after the medical examiners, the state rests, and the defense only calls one witness, and that is Tracey's husband, Nay. Basically, he just talks about the fact that he was usually the one that picked her up. He would usually pick her up in his truck and bring her home. Occasionally, he would pick her up in Tracey's Lexus SUV. And from where you're sitting in the driver's seat with the rearview mirror, can you see the car seat? Can you see into the back seat like that? And he says no, and tries to ask, well, would Tracey be able to see from her position? And no, of course, you can't really answer that because he's taller than her. And so do you have to adjust the mirror when you get in? Yes. Right. I mean, the crime scene techs did take pictures of the view from the driver's seat into the rear view mirror. They put the car seat in there, kind of where it would have been, and from different positions in the car, what you would have seen. So that was kind of it. And basically, was he close to the car in the afternoon while he was in the yard? And he says he was, but he couldn't see into the car because the level of the seat on the riding lawnmower, he specified that it was the height of the driver's seat. And so he couldn't actually see into the car, so he didn't notice that the car seat was in there either.
Right.
And that's really it. Yeah.
Does she take the stand at all?
No, she does not.
Do you have the jury instructions? Like, what were the different kind of levels of things?
Yes. So it was aggravated manslaughter. And then there's also a Florida law. I don't think it has a simple title. It's like leaving a child in a vehicle for longer than 15 minutes or less than 15 minutes, but causes serious bodily harm.
Okay.
And then if you decide that those are not applicable, then the next step down would be manslaughter, not aggravated manslaughter.
What's the difference between manslaughter and aggravated manslaughter?
So the difference is that she's a child. So if you have an elderly person or a child, they're more vulnerable, then that can raise it to aggravated manslaughter. So they do bring up what the definitions are. And for aggravated manslaughter, there are 3 things the state has to prove. The first one is that Uriel's dead. That's not in question.
Right.
The third one is that Uri was a child under the care of Tracey Nix, and the death was as a result of the neglect of Tracey Nix, which is also not in question.
Right.
The one that is in question is the number 2, which is about culpable negligence. And it does state that forgetting something or an unintentional act is simple negligence, but to make it culpable negligence, there has to be some consciousness of your action, knowledge that that action could cause harm. A reasonable person would recognize that it would cause harm, which I think that's kind of where it comes in, was Tracey really aware of her behavior, and was it a choice? Because you could say a parent that goes to the store, their kid's asleep in the car, and they say, I just have to grab a couple of things. I'm just going to run in and do that and come back out. And they end up in there for more than 15 minutes. It's a hot day. Even if it was less than 15 minutes, it doesn't matter if there's a serious consequence, right? And they just aren't really thinking about like, oh, it gets hot in the car. Like the temperature goes up really quickly, especially in Florida. That was a conscious choice to leave the child in the car.
I can totally see that, whereas you could say, well, it was a complete accident because there was no conscious thought of, I'm just going to leave her in here while I do this. She'll be okay.
Right.
I think there was a case last year or so. I think it was in Arizona. The dad left the kid in the car and he just went in and played video games. I'm not that current on all of it, but if there was that conscious choice of like, well, she'll be okay in the car, I don't have to watch her closely.
Right. And I think the defense was basically saying, well, the state's argument that somehow there's a higher bar because Uri was a 7-month-old somehow makes that culpable negligence. But in their view, that factor is covered by point number 3, the fact that she was a child and that she died as a result of the neglect of Tracey Nix, but that's not part of the definition of the culpable negligence part of it.
Right.
So the defense basically does we've all forgotten things. We've all forgotten that we were supposed to pick up our kid, or we had groceries in the trunk and things like that. And why did she forget? I don't know. Was it age? Was it distraction because she had the roofers there? The dog? Was it other plans that she had that day? She just forgot. We've all done that. And until you remember, you don't remember. I mean, that's kind of the definition of that. And Tracey Nix has to live with this burden. And the rebuttal from the state is pretty much, Uri isn't groceries. She's not an unlocked door. She's not a pet that you forgot to walk. She's a 7-month-old who's completely dependent on another person. Therefore, any reasonable person would recognize that that needs to be the focus of your attention, and that's something you cannot afford to forget, and you need to do all in your power. That should be the top of mind, not anything else. So
yeah, I think that's a hard between like, okay, two different points of that culpable negligence. One being, did you recognize that there could be harm, right, in the action? And then the other being, wasn't conscious, but would a reasonable person be conscious of it? I don't know.
Yes.
It's like...
Right. Yeah. And I think it is kind of like, well, that's a pretty big thing to forget. And would most people actually forget about that?
Right.
You know, like, because groceries isn't a significant or serious thing to forget, that makes more sense that that's something that you might forget. But an infant that you've just spent all this time with, like, would you really forget? And isn't it your responsibility to make sure that you're not forgetting it, you know? So, but the jury instructions, I listened to them twice and just listened to all of the language. And there was something that the judge said during the manslaughter definition that says, every person has a duty to act reasonably toward others. If there is a violation of that duty without any conscious intention to harm, that violation is negligence. In order to convict of manslaughter by act, it is not necessary for the state to prove that the defendant had an intent to cause death, only an intent to commit an act that was not merely negligent and which caused death. So to me, on first listen, I felt like I wasn't sure that I could get to the culpable part, because it did seem like she just forgot, and the other things the state was trying to bring in really didn't fit into that category. Or it would make sense that that's not really under that category, it's under the other one. But this statement right there seems like you don't have to have intended to do it. It's just that you did an act and it resulted in the death of another person. But then he goes on to describe culpable negligence, that it's more than a failure to use ordinary care towards others. So it has to be gross, it has to be flagrant, it's a course of conduct showing reckless disregard of human life or the safety of persons exposed to its dangerous effects, or such an entire want of care as to raise a presumption of conscious disregard of consequences, or shows wantonness or recklessness or a grossly careless disregard for the safety and well-being of the public. I mean, that's a pretty tall order.
Yeah, well, it's kind of like, I mean, is the first thing just the definition of manslaughter, first of all, is like an action that you took that you didn't intend to, or whether or not you intended to, ended up in somebody's death. I feel like that's just manslaughter in general. And then there's like, okay, I don't know.
But, you know, the two things they said, so for aggravated manslaughter, it has to be Uri's dead, the death was caused by the culpable negligence of Tracey, and that she was under the age of 6, right? And then the only difference is in the manslaughter one is just the removing the child part of it. So it still does say it requires culpable negligence. So this first statement, it's not necessary for the state to prove that they had an intent to cause death, does seem a little bit contradictory to the next one about culpable negligence. So, you know, I thought, well, I think we have to go with manslaughter, but then you add in the culpable part. Well, if you determine that she's culpable, then it's aggravated manslaughter.
Right.
You know, it's not manslaughter because it involves a child, and we know she's a child. So if it's one, it has to be aggravated manslaughter. And the other one is leaving a child in a motor vehicle in excess of 15 minutes, causing great bodily harm. I mean,
no brainer on that one.
Yeah. So that is for sure, you have to find guilty for that. So I don't know. I think the hard thing in this case as a juror is that we can all relate. It could happen to any of us.
Yeah, well, it is like, okay, it could happen to any of us, but at the same time, we're talking about like what a reasonable person. It's like, well, yeah, but would it? Man, you would think it wouldn't. I wonder why the defense didn't maybe lean into early like onset dementia or something like that, where
Right.
like, yeah, a reasonable person wouldn't do this.
Right.
But I mean, they're not going to plead insanity, but could they plead that she doesn't have the same faculty of mind? Maybe.
I mean, yeah, that is a question, though you'd really have to show, okay, she's forgotten all these other things, you know, it can't be just a one
time, right?
You know, so there has to be a pattern that's being shown. Ultimately, I felt like the definition of the charge, I didn't feel like I could get there to find her guilty of aggravated manslaughter, because I do believe it wasn't conscious. She just forgot. Do I think she should have forgotten? No.
Right.
You know, but I do believe it was an innocent forgetting. And so I think I would come back with just guilty on the charge of leaving a child in a motor vehicle unattended, causing great bodily harm. And you have to come back guilty on that.
And then not guilty on either of the manslaughter.
Yes, not guilty, which is a hard thing to come to for me, because I do feel like there should be some responsibility taken. But by definition in the law, I don't think it reaches that definition. So that wraps up our trial coverage, the court coverage for the Tracey Nix trial. And next we will be moving on to Maryn's portion of what makes this case a good one for us to cover. What makes it complicated?
Right.
Because it seems like it should be pretty straightforward.
What's happening outside of the courtroom. Yeah, I'm interested to talk about it with you and discuss those different things, if it changes anything at all.
So you'll have to join us next time to hear the other half of the story. Until then, I'm Christy.
I'm Maryn.
And you're listening to Hung.